On this edition of the NESN Red Sox podcast, we're going to focus exclusively on Red Sox prospects, namely as it relates to the Red Sox bullpen going into the 2019 season. Who are we going to see called up first?
Yeah, and we'll look at some of the position prospects, see who's sort of topping the rankings these days, and sort of look at the farm system as a whole and as it relates to where it was last year.
Swing and a miss, strike three, it's over. The Red Sox have won the World Championship.
The Red Sox walk it off. Mookie Betts. That ball is gone. The X-Man strikes. What a bullet by Devers.
I'd love to see the exit velocity on that one.
It's time to party.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to another edition of the NESN Red Sox podcast. I'm Ricky Doyle, joined as always by Dakota Randall. Dakota, what's going on?
It's not too much. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Couldn't be better. So we're in the thick of things here for spring training.
About 2 weeks away.
Yeah, opening day coming
Sneaking
up quick.
It's gross.
Certainly doesn't feel that way, but I think this is a good time. You know, we like to catch up every now and then with some of the guys at Sox Prospects and just to sort of get a read on where the Red Sox farm system's at. This is an interesting time to talk prospects and whatnot, who could be coming down the pike later in the season perhaps. There's even a few questions coming right out of the gate, really,
right,
when you talk about the bullpen. So we're going to catch up with Ian Cundall, the Director of Scouting for SoxProspects.com. I know you and I both have some questions we'd like to run across his desk.
Yeah, and I think primarily the same question, the biggest storyline in Red Sox camp right now is about the bullpen. And, you know, again, the Red Sox have not replaced Craig Kimbrell. They've said they're not bringing him back. So it's, you know, who's going to get some of these big innings late in the game? And, you know, people have sort of identified Matt Barnes as a possible closer. I've never seen it. I still don't see it. But you just look up and down the bullpen. And I know you don't want to make too much of spring training, but every guy, Barnes, inning 4 runs. Thornburg, 4 innings, 7 runs. Workman throwing high 80s now, 4 runs. Velasquez has been shelled. Brian Johnson's been hit around. Colten Brewer has not been very good. Bobby Pointer, Marcus Walden's been good. Just across the board, all the guys that you think would factor into this bullpen in the regular season have not performed well. And that doesn't even mention that Brian Brazier, with his toe issue, has yet to throw. Heath Embry hasn't thrown yet. And so, to me, I look at it and I say there might be some guys who don't even make this team. I'm looking at someone maybe like Brandon Workman, and there might be guys who just aren't even ready to start the season. Perhaps that's Tyler Thornburg, perhaps that's Ryan Brazier. So there might be some openings, and that's, of course, where prospects come in. And I know the Herald's Jason Mastrodonato had his roster projection today, and he had Darwinzon Hernandez, who kind of, him and Bobby Dalbec have been the flavors of spring training. And so Darwinzon Hernandez is a guy we'll talk a lot about with Ian Cundall. And just in general, I think the big topic, you know, what young arms could come up and factor into this bullpen, because I think it's easy to assume the Red Sox are going to need help in that area as the season goes on.
Yeah, it feels like, at least in the early going, there's going to be a lot of just mixing and matching of potions. It's like a scientist in a lab.
And Cora has
trying
said,
to figure out the right ingredients here to get the job done, which is...
And Cora said he's open to the closer by committee, which I hate.
And it's a sort of a dangerous path to be wandering down as well. I mean, you just... You know, I guess if you're going to try some things out, April and May are a good opportunity to do that, but you also don't want to, you know, look up at the end of April and you're sitting a few games below 500 based on games that were blown by the bullpen. So I don't think it's any secret this team is going to be, you know, relying upon its offense again, and also the starting rotation, which it really stacks up with, you know, the best of the best across Major League Baseball when all things are firing, you know, when you're firing on all cylinders. But that bullpen, it was a theme throughout last season. They won in spite of it, but at least last season there were, you know, you had Craig Kimbrell an all-star caliber closer to fall back on. You had Joe Kelly through, you know, for all his ups and downs last season, still had points where he was really, really good, obviously in the postseason, to parlay that into a contract with the Dodgers. So it's a lot of the same questions, but fewer guys to answer those questions.
And you worry that a little bit of organizational arrogance sets in, which is understandable because they just did it, and they just proved everybody wrong that they could do it with the bullpen and the way they constructed that bullpen. But that said, you know, that can work in the playoffs, but you're not having Nathan Eovaldi and these guys coming out in the 8th inning like you did in the playoffs. So you need some guys that can step up and prove that they can pitch in those high leverage spots. And it'll be interesting to see if those guys are in the minors.
You win a World Series, you get a little bit of wiggle room.
A little bit, but it goes in Boston. It goes till like
I was
June.
gonna say it's only so much still though.
Right, but it's not just pitchers that I think are interesting right now in camp and just in general in the organization. And we'll talk about this with Ian. But the narrative surrounding the Red Sox farm system the last couple of years has been it bottomed out. It was depleted. It wasn't very good, and we felt that kind of changed towards the end of last season because it seemed like they had a really good draft class. And I think that's continued this year. Tristan Cassis has a lot of buzz. We've mentioned Bobby Delbeck. And there are some other guys, some sort of hidden gems that we'll talk about. And, I think it'll be interesting to hear what Ian thinks about this because he's seen all of these guys where we haven't.
So what do you say we just dive right into it?
Let's do it.
Joined now by Ian Kundle, Director of Scouting for SoxProspects.com. Caught up with them last year to talk about the Red Sox farm system. We're going to do the same to set the stage for the 2019 season. Ian, how's it going?
Good. How you doing, guys?
Doing great. Doing great.
Well.
Progressing towards opening day here, so we figured we'd bring you in,
Yep.
Sort of set the table because there are several questions related to the Red Sox farm system. Particularly, I don't know about you, Dakota. I want to start in the bullpen though, because I think that's sort of the biggest area of fluctuation when it comes to the Red Sox in spring training.
Right, and just in general, it seems like there's 2 times of the year where people love to talk about prospects. It's spring training in September, around September call-ups. So this is kind of a perfect time to do it because the hyperbole can sometimes get a little out of whack with these guys. So it's good to get kind of an expert in to, give you a real scoop on it. But I agree, the bullpen is where we should focus.
So, and it's interesting too. I mean, there are several returning names that are still in the bullpen. But I mean, with the there's several players added to the 40-man roster over the offseason. I mean, you got Darwinzon Hernandez, Travis Lakins, Danny Reyes, Josh Taylor. Also some other potential call-ups in Durbin Feltman, maybe Mike Shawarin, Tanner Houck. So I guess I was just wondering, Ian, when you look at this crop of young pitching prospects, who do you expect to see first in 2019? And then who exactly do you have, maybe the highest hopes for as it relates to 2019?
Well, I think the first couple of guys you're going to look at are the guys who they acquired this offseason. Colten Brewer, the guy they got from the Padres. Obviously, he hasn't been great this spring training, but they went out and got him for a reason. He has some big league experience. He's on the 40-man, and I think that kind of gives him a leg up on a few of the other guys you mentioned, who all of them are, they're entering their rookie year if they get called up. After him, I think, is when you kind of get into, there's kind of a next tier, and that's the Travis Lakins, Josh Taylor, and then the big wild card is probably kind of the standout performer from camp, it seems, thus far, in Darwinzon Hernandez. With Lakins and Taylor, you have a couple guys who are going to probably be in Pawtucket to start the year. Lakins has already pitched in Pawtucket, in fact. And they're both true bullpen arms, but they throw hard. They've got good secondary pitches. And then with Taylor, he's a lefty, so it's more of a question. He just needs to throw more strikes, refine his command, whereas Lakins is just staying on the field. He's had big injury concerns. And so I think the 3 guys right there are the first 3 you'd look into if the Red Sox want to go down to the farm for bullpen. But then the wild card for me is Darwinzon. He's someone that I think Alex Cora spent a lot of time talking with, and it's pretty noteworthy today that they made a few cuts from Major League camp, and they kept him, even though they sent back some other guys who were probably closer to the big leagues, you would have thought, than him. And with Darwinzon Hernandez, it's always just been a question of, will he throw enough strikes to be a starter? Right now, he's obviously in camp. He's throwing really well. He's got big fastball. He's throwing 4 pitches. He's really improved his secondary pitches over the year. And in a bullpen role, I really think he could excel. But since he has a chance to start, I think that's probably the best developmental path for both the organization and for him, at least to start the year. But I think Cora's pretty much telegraphed their thinking when they said he's going to be up sometime after March 28th and before September 1st. And given he's never thrown more than 120 innings in a season, he's going to be on an innings limit at some point, and so it makes sense to transition him to the bullpen later in the year. And at that point, I think he's someone who could definitely play a big role down the stretch with the Red Sox.
Well, so sort of off of that, obviously, unless they bring back Craig Kimbrell, which they basically said they're not going to, this team right now doesn't have a closer. I know they've talked about Matt Barnes and a couple other guys, but in terms of closers of the future, the big name we've heard the most of is Durbin Feltman because he had that role in college and he was sort of drafted as a closer. But looking around some of the people following the team, it seems like a lot of people feel Darwinzon Hernandez could, in fact, maybe play that role, or maybe even a guy like Travis Lakins who throws more strikes. So for you, Of those three, or maybe there's a different one in the system, who do you see as a potential closer of the future for the Red Sox? Who has the stuff and the makeup to sort of fill that role?
I think that Durbin Feldman ultimately is the long-term closer option. I'm not sure it's this year. I don't think it's this year, frankly. I think he'll get up this year at some point, but I think it'll be later in the year, and they're not going to throw him straight into the deep end, as a closer.
Right.
Darwinzon has the stuff to be a closer, but I just think he's more valuable if he can stick in the rotation. We know the trouble the Red Sox have had developing homegrown starting pitching prospects, and we see how much starting pitching goes for on the open market. If they can develop Darwinzon Hernandez into like a number 3 starter, which I think is definitely on the table now that he's improved his secondary offerings, then that to me is a lot more valuable than a closer type. And I think given the Red Sox actions this offseason, where they didn't go after Craig Kimbrell, they're showing that they value the rotation. They went after Eovaldi instead with that money, and they reinforced that area of the team. And I think if Darwinzon can turn into a starter, that's ultimately more valuable to them. And then with Lakins, I'm just not sure he doesn't have the same kind of stuff that someone like Feltman does. Fastball velo is a little lower. Secondaries aren't as crisp. Feltman's just like the prototypical what you expect to see in a late inning game. He's going to come out here pumping 96, 97 with a hammer breaking ball. Whereas Lakins is a little more, he's got a couple more pitches, and it's more like 92, 94-ish. But he can run it up to, 97, 98 on occasion. But it's a little lower velo. And the secondary just isn't as good as Feltman's breaking ball is. So I think I see him more as like a potential like 7th, 8th inning option in the mold of kind of what Matt Barnes was last year or the year before.
Okay. And sticking on the pitchers, you talk about Hernandez. They might try and see what he can do as a starter. It seems like at least from what I see, 3 guys right now that it seems like they're in Brian Mata, Tanner Houck, and Darwinzon Hernandez, who, when you read about him, it seems the narrative is that they have the potential to be a mid-rotation starter if everything goes right. And if for those 3 guys, do any of them, in your mind, have the ability to go beyond that? Do you see any frontline starter ability in those guys, sort of like what they've said about Jay Groom, or do you agree that Mata, Houck, and Hernandez project more as middle of the rotation guys if they stick as starters?
Yeah, I don't see any like front of the rotation upside with those guys. With Houck, I'm still not even convinced he's a starter. He's gone back to his old college delivery recently, and that is more like lower arm slot, a lot more effort comes across his body. And then with Mata, he kind of regressed a little bit last year. His delivery has gotten a little more difficult to project in the rotation, and the stuff hasn't taken a step forward, and the command also needs improvement. So I think those guys are more like back end types if they develop. Hernandez has the highest ceiling for me of those 3, but it's still not like the top end, high end frontline pitcher, just because I don't even think, even if his command takes a step forward, he's ever going to reach the command he would need to profile in that role.
Now, just because you mentioned him, Dakota, what is the latest on Jay Groom? I know he underwent Tommy John surgery last May. It's still obviously a highly regarded pitching prospect. I believe the top pitching prospect according to you guys' rankings. So I was just wondering sort of what the latest is on him and how you view him coming off that injury.
It's really hard to say. Obviously Tommy John is a lot more reliable, or guys come back a lot more frequently than they used to, but still every case is different. And I know that they'd like to get him some innings at some point this season, but I very much doubt we'll see him in a game before mid to late summer. So like we're looking at July. He started throwing now, but other than that, it's a long road to recovery, and it's just really tough for him because he's had injury issues in his prior seasons too. So he's going to be entering, if he pitches maybe 20, 30 innings at the end of the season this year, he still will have not even 100 innings in his career, and he's signed in 2016. So innings-wise, he's way behind the curve, but the key for him is just to come back healthy, and then he can make up the innings as he goes along.
Now I wonder on him too, and there's never any good time, I guess, to have Tommy John surgery, but I'm wondering the difference between Jay Groom having it really before he could get any legitimate start in professional ball, and someone like Dylan Bundy, who, if I'm right, had Tommy John a little bit later on in his development. I think he was either in AA or AAA. Out of the two, do you think if Groom was ever going to have it, it's better that he had it way early on in his development, or is it worse for a prospect to have it when they're closer to the majors?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think another example is someone like Michael Kopech last year. Obviously, the ex-Red Sox prospect got up to the big leagues, made I think 1 start, and then felt something in his arm and had to have Tommy John. I think a lot of it depends on the pitcher and their mentality and how they handle their rehab. Because if you have the guys who get up to the big leagues, they get a taste of it, or they get really close and then they have the injury, they're going to be really motivated to get back. But on the alternative, you can also say the same with the guys who have it farther away. That they're far away, but this is they're going to say, all right, I'm getting it out of the way, and now it's going to make me stronger going forward as I push for what the ultimate goal is. So I think a lot of it is just case specific, and the bigger concern, though, to me still is, as I said, is just the lack of innings Groom has thrown. Because, before the Tommy John, he's had other issues, other injury issues that have caused him to miss a lot of time. And so it's just it all adds up, basically. When you're throwing in the first season, he throws 6 innings. His second year, he only threw 50, and then the third year, it's injured. That's tough. Basically, he'll be going into 2020 if he comes back healthy. It'll be his fifth year in the system, or fourth year in the system, and he'll have only thrown that few innings. That's not ideal. Whereas at least when you have the guys who have it later on, they have some base to build on. They've handled the rigors of a full season. They've actually gone out there and done it, whereas Groom really hasn't yet.
Well, we'll switch over to the position player side of the fence for a minute. And Michael Chavis, widely considered the Red Sox top prospect to begin 2019. When do you anticipate seeing him at the major league level, and really what does he have left to prove at the minors? I know obviously circumstance is going to play a big role in this, injuries cropping up, things like that, but just from the onset of the season, what more do you need to see from him in order to earn a big league call-up?
For me, it's two things. It's the first one is actually not at the plate. It's defensively. He needs to figure out a position. We've seen in spring training, he's played first base, second base, and third base, and he needs to find a long-term position, or either that, or he's got to be committed to be developing into kind of like the super utility role where he plays a bunch of different positions. And so that would be the first thing that I think is kind of holding him back. And then the second thing is actually, there's two more things. A second thing is health. This is actually, ironically, his first spring training in 3 years. It's kind of hard to believe, but he missed spring training last year. He was injured, and same with 2016. So this is kind of the first time he's just been on the field. He's actually getting out there and being able to play, which I think is just a good thing. But he's just got to stay on the field now. He's had the injuries, the suspensions. He's missed a lot of at-bats, and he still needs to make those up. And then the third thing for me is just how his hit tool develops. We know the power is legit. We've seen in the spring training games. I think he's leading the team in home runs already. But that's all well and good, but if you don't make contact, you're never going to tap into that raw power. And so I just want to see him consistently be able to handle upper minors pitching and show that he can make contact. And when he does that, I think is kind of when he'll start pushing for that big league call-up, which I do think will come at some point this season.
Okay. And another guy who's gotten a lot of play this spring has been Bobby Dalbec. David Price trying to pump up his Twitter followers and whatnot. Where do you stand on Dalbec? And, I guess a question I also would have added to the previous one is, do you believe Michael Chavis actually is the top prospect or positional prospect in the organization? Or do you believe maybe Dalbec has surpassed him? Or where do you stand on him at this point?
So I have Chavis as number one, but I have him, Dalbec, and the third guy, Tristan Casas, the first-round pick last year, as very close together. They're all kind of in the same range for me. With Dalbec, I think that it's interesting to me that they kept him up at big league camp while they sent Chavis down, even though Chavis has got some time in Pawtucket, whereas Dalbec obviously only finished last year in Portland after destroying Salem for half the season. So Dalbec with him is, I think, and part of the reason I think that's the case was just Dalbec's a better defender. He's someone that they can throw out there right now, and his defense is major league quality at third base, whereas Chavis is, as I mentioned earlier, needs some improvement. And so with Dalbec, I think that he's obviously the better defender and the power is elite, but his biggest question, and it is a huge question, is can he hit? He's a guy who even last year, he only hit like 260 while he hit 32 home runs, struck out 176 times and 450 at bats. When you're having a strikeout rate over 30% in the low, mid, in high A and double A, that's a red flag. There's not a lot of guys who have a success at the major league level with the striker rate that high in the minors, because he's only going to be facing better pitching as he moves up the ladder. And so for him, it's just he needs to make consistent contact, because if he can hit 220 even at the major league level, he's a guy who's going to hit 30-plus home runs in a year, every year. But I'm not sure he can hit 220, and that's what's kind of keeps him behind Chavis for me, is that I have more confidence in Chavis' ability at the plate, because even if his bat doesn't develop, I still think he could go up to the big leagues and hit like 250, 260, whereas Dahlbeck is someone that I'm, best case scenario, maybe he hits 240, 250, but there's also a scenario where he, comes up and he's hitting around 200, and just he never makes that next step and adjusts to big league pitching.
So is it fair to say that Dahlbeck has a higher ceiling but a lower floor as it
Oh,
relates
yeah.
to Chavis?
Yeah, definitely. Dahlbeck's ceiling, if everything clicks, is like he's the guy you slot in, number 5, number 6 in the lineup and hits 250 with 35 home runs and plays borderline. He plays plus defense at third base, and he's got like a 70 arm, well above average. Off the mound, he was up to the mid 90s in college, so he's like your prototypical power slugging third baseman if everything clicks. But there's also the scenario where he never hits enough to adjust to big league pitching and ends up as like a 4A, up and down guy.
Now, this might be a huge, hugely unfair comparison for Bobby Dahlbeck, but when I hear the things surrounding him, it reminds me a lot of what people said about Aaron Judge when he was coming up. In the same, Aaron Judge is 3 inches taller, but Bobby Dahlbeck is a taller guy.
Yeah.
And
he's like 6'4", 6'5".
Yeah, big guy with a lot of raw power. Who people said, well, he just he strikes out a ton, he can't miss contact, or he can't make contact, but if it all clicks, it could be really good. And of course, the way it clicked for Judge is different than what it would be for most guys, because he just took it to another level. But is there optimism around the organization that there could be a similar kind of thing with Dahlbeck where it just happens all of a sudden, or are they really just kind of hoping?
No, there's definitely. I can't speak for what the Red Sox personally think, but I know just in my conversations with scouts, there are guys who believe in Bobby Dahlbeck and will throw their hat on the table and say this is my guy. So there's definitely people, and I've seen him both good and bad, and he's always going to be a streaky guy. But I think that one thing you got to take into account is he's the guy who's been a two-way player his entire life up until pro ball. So he finally gave up pitching in 2016, which he just came out and said he hated doing anyway. And so he's finally, these are the first couple of seasons where he's only having to focus on one thing, and I think that's definitely making a difference. And he's got a good approach. Like, he knows balls and strikes. He'll get caught out on a breaking ball on occasion, but what power hitter doesn't in this day and age? And the strikeout thing, it's not that big a deal as it used to be in the majors. There are a ton of guys who strike out 25+%. It's just when you get in that next tier, up to the 35% range, that's where it gets tough. And we've seen Judge has made adjustments when he got to the big leagues. He's like a 280 hitter right now, which given his size and everything is insane, but he still struck out 200 times in 542 at bats or 700 plate appearances. So Dahlbeck's, the strikeouts are going to be there. It's just getting them to a manageable level. And if that means, he comes up and fails the first time, but sees, the necessary swing changes he needs to make, like Judge did, shortening up a little bit, then he can do it, because he's got the raw power where, if he has to shorten up his swing a little bit, I still have faith that he'll be able to, consistently hit 30+ home runs a year. Okay.
And to get to the third guy that you mentioned, Tristan Casas, he got the thumb surgery 2 games into his professional career last year. This is a first-round pick, first baseman or third baseman?
First baseman.
Yeah, with a lot of power, and he hasn't had a lot of time on the professional level yet. Scouts seem to fawn over him. He's ranked near at the top of almost all the prospect rankings. So, what is it about this guy that people have seen, despite not having much professional ball to go on, that has people so high on him? Because Red Sox fans just haven't seen much from him or anything.
Yeah, a lot of it came from the fall instructional league last year. He was healthy when that was going on, and that's an area where scouts flock to, and that when people see him, and I saw him down there actually also. When people see him there, you see why they took him in the first round. He's got that prototypical like slugger's frame, like 6'4", 240. The swing is very nice, and when he takes BP, it's just the ball jumps off his bat. It's huge power, even to all fields too. I've seen him go opposite field, off the wall at at the JetBlue Park down there. Yep. And that's something you don't see that often from an 18-year-old, because he was 18 at the time when that happened. So that's where a lot of, I think, the hype is coming from. He had a really good fall instructional league, and that was the first look for a lot of pro scouts. So, when you have a bunch of guys seeing someone for the first time and he stands out like he did down there, the reports coming back are going to be good. And if he can just stay healthy, he's someone who is going to be very interesting to watch because it's a lot. You can really dream on it, but he looks physically a lot like Freddie Freeman. The swing is pretty similar to it, and if everything clicks, then that might be the very that's obviously the very best case scenario. But you can dream on it, which is a nice thing to be able to say about someone in the system.
Yeah.
One guy that hasn't really gotten a lot of play, but I was kind of interested to see what he was able to do in camp thus far. I mentioned it to Dakota a few weeks ago. Was C.J. Chatham, and it stems down to just the uncertainty surrounding the shortstop position at the major league level with Xander Bogaerts set to become a free agent next winter. Now, I was just I was anxious because I haven't really heard too much about him before this spring, as to what sort of what Chatham's skill set is and what you view his ceiling to be. I mean, I know Alex Cora dropped the J.J. Hardy comp on him a few days ago as it relates to his frame and whatnot, but I was just wondering in terms of skill set whether there are any similarities there and how you've sort of assessed him to this point.
Yeah, that's actually physically that's not bad because he's really big for a shortstop.
He's a lanky kid,
listed,
right?
He's like 6'4", 180, 190. Just really long limbs. He covers a lot of ground, and actually he's a very good defender. That's the first thing. Really good plus arm, really good instincts, and given how long his stride is, he covers ground pretty effortlessly. And so defensively at shortstop, there's really no questions. It's just two things. It seems to be a trend a little bit with Red Sox prospects, but health. He's missed a lot of time with injuries. After he signed, he had a broken thumb that caused him to miss a lot of time. And then in 2017, he basically lost the entire season because of a couple of hamstring injuries. Then last year, he missed the beginning of the season with a hamstring injury. So health, and then his calling card is never going to be power, and that's the other kind of concern if it's an everyday profile. He's someone who I think can hit. He's his minor league career, he's an over 300 hitter, good contact skills, but for a guy who's 6'4", he just doesn't have a lot of loft in his swing, and he just doesn't drive the ball over the fence. And given his defense and contact skills, I think that's fine. I don't think it's a very high ceiling, but I think he could be like a second division regular type if he stays healthy and everything clicks. And obviously he's not as good as, I don't think his ceiling long term is what Xander Bogaerts is right now. But he's someone who I would be comfortable plugging in. I'm just not sure it would be next season, which obviously is when Bogaerts is gone. So that's the question.
Well, sticking on shortstops, another guy that sort of made his way into the top 10 rankings is Antony Flores. And for those that don't know, I believe he was one of 3 Venezuelans the Red Sox signed on the international signing market back in 2017. The other was Daniel Flores, the catcher who passed away, and I think Danny Diaz was in there too. But Antony Flores also a shortstop, 6'1", not as big as Chatham, but kind of making his way into these top 10 rankings. So I'm wondering, what you've heard about him, what you've seen, just your general impression, because he's higher than the likes of Durbin Feldman and some of the other players on some of these rankings.
Yeah, Flores is a really exciting guy. He's another one who was at the Fall Instructional League last year, which was his first stateside experience, save for 1 or 2 games with the GCL, where, of course, here we go again, he got hurt last season. But he's someone who is not your prototypical Latin American signing. He's actually pretty maxed out physically. As you said, he's listed at 6'1", 190. So he's not one of these, really skinny guys who you can project 30 pounds. He's going to add 30 pounds as he develops through the system. He kind of is what he is physically. But he's just a guy who he does everything well. I'm not sure he has a standout tool, but I'm also not sure there's any tool that is going to be below fringe average to average. Run is probably the biggest question mark. I like him in shortstop. He's got, I would say, above average to plus arm, soft hands, good instincts for his age, and just plays the game nicely in the field. Has a little bit of that flair you like to see at shortstop. Just really fluid out there. He's got a little bit of pop he'll show in batting practice. I'm not sure it's ever going to be, above average like some of the other guys we've talked about, but maybe average-ish power you can dream on, 15-ish home runs a year. And then I think his hit tools are better than that. You're looking at someone, he's got really good feel for hit for someone his age. He's only 18, as you said. But I like the swing. He's got bat speed. And he just makes a lot of hard contact, and that's just something I like to see. And he didn't look out of place at all, facing a lot of college guys during the instructional league, including some really high draft picks for the Rays last year. And so he's someone I'm definitely really looking forward to this year, and who, if things break right this year and he's healthy, could definitely push into the top 3, 4 of the system next offseason.
Well, that was actually going to be my next question, because I think we asked you this last year as well, in our effort to be ahead of the curve. Which who's kind of one prospect whose stock you think could could soar this season? Obviously, Flores, you just mentioned. Is there anybody else that you think that might be able to climb his way up the rankings by the middle of the season or even the end of the season?
Yeah, I'll give you two actually. One is way off the radar, and if it happens, he's going to blow up massively. It's a guy that you've kind of seen on the back end of a few lists this season in Gilberto Jimenez. He's a guy they signed out of the Dominican in 2017 for $10,000, and they last year was his first year, and he came out in the DSL and hit 319, 384 with a 420 slugging with 16 stolen bases. And he's just an unbelievable athlete, one of the best they've had or I've seen in the system for a while now. He's the prototypical projectable Latin guy too. He's extremely loose, very athletic. He can definitely add some muscle. He's got bat speed, quick hands. In center field, he's very good, and he's like a 70 runner, so he just flies out of the box. And he only started switch hitting a year ago, but he really seems to have taken to it. He definitely needs to improve his left-handed swing, but that'll come with time. When you're switch hitting for a year and you don't look that out of place, it's a good sign. And so he's someone that now that he's coming stateside, if things click, he's got one of the higher ceilings of anyone in the system. And then the other guy is actually someone who's appeared in a few spring training games this year. In Jaron Duran, he was the Red Sox. Yeah, he was the Red Sox 7th-round pick last year out of Long Beach State, and he's someone I've just really liked ever since I first saw him with Lowell last year, and he dominated last year. He had 348 in Lowell, 367 in Greenville, and he's another guy who flies. It's plus speed, and he hit, and that's the thing. If he hits with his athleticism and his speed, he's the type of guy that could be pushing, into the high minors this season even, because he's probably going to start in Salem, I would guess. And be someone who we could see, not necessarily this year, but maybe next year or the year after as a potential option for the major league level, because he does everything well except for the power. I'm not sure it's going to come, even though he's like 6'2", but when he's got the speed, I think he'll make enough contact, and if he makes enough contact, that speed is going to wreak havoc on the bases. And so he's another guy who I think if he shows that he can handle high minors pitching, could definitely shoot up into the top 10 for next offseason.
So it seems like they have a decent amount of guys to come out of the 2017 international period and then the 2018 draft, because I know the narrative sort of surrounding this organization, the farm system going into last season was how weak it is, and it's sort of still a narrative surrounding the farm system. But I think we got the sense at the end of last season that things were looking up, and we've mentioned some of the guys from 2017 and 2018. So is it fair to say that they are trending upward, at least as it relates to how this farm system looks relative to the rest of Major League Baseball?
Oh yeah, definitely. The system, obviously, given how much they traded away, it was bound to take a downturn for a while. But those two classes have a long way to rebuilding the depth. And I think when you look at, if you're going from like the 5 to 20-ish range, that's a solid group if it was a little bit lower. And so what they're really just missing right now is those higher end prospects that teams have. Their middle tier is pretty similar to some of the upper echelon systems, I would say, but it's just at the top they're really light. And part of that is through graduation, obviously. When you develop guys like Andrew Benintendi, Rafael Devers, Xander Bogaerts, that takes a toll on your quote-unquote prospect rankings. And then same with the trades. You got Kopech, Yohan Moncada, all the guys they traded to the Padres. That also does it. So depth-wise, the system is definitely drastically improved through that draft and the international period. It's just, now the question is, are any of those guys going to take that next step and establish themselves as more, national prospects on the top 100 radar, rather than just being, solid within the Red Sox, the guys who move into the top 10.
Okay. So I got one more question for you.
There we go.
Mm-hmm. It's probably the most important question that we'll ask you.
Okay.
It's also sort of an annual question, and that's what's going on with Trey Ball.
Oh, Trey Ball.
Obviously, the first 7th overall pick in 2013. He switched back to hitting towards the end of last season. Set baseball world afire when he hit a double. So I want to know, in your opinion, can Trey Ball hit? Is there any hope that this transition is going to work out for him?
I mean, you can never say never. But I saw him hit last year. He's got some power, which you'd expect. 6'6", there's some pop in the swing. The approach and the pitch recognition is going to take a while, which makes sense when you didn't really hit for 6 years. And So I think it's just he needs reps, and it's that, and then will he take to it? The transition from pitcher to hitter obviously is going to be very difficult, and if you don't have the right mentality, it's going to make it even more difficult. He really needs to embrace the role and be committed to it in order to potentially go anywhere as a position player. And that's something I'm kind of looking. I want to see how he is during spring training this year and kind of have a better idea. Because when I saw him in Intrix last year, he had a couple good swings, but then there were just some other times where he didn't know what he was doing at the plate. Just get a breaking ball, just didn't recognize it way out in front. And so I think it's going to take time, which unfortunately is something he doesn't really have, considering he's already 24 years old and is likely going to have to go to Greenville to start as a position player. So I would say never say never, but it's a difficult road for him.
My advice for Trey Ball is, according to Baseball Reference, his real name is Ronald Eugene Ball.
Yeah.
So I think he should just leave the whole Trey Ball thing behind and become Ronald Eugene Ball, the outfielder.
Resurface it.
You just just repackage himself, and then let's just forget
it's like
Trey Ball ever happened.
A wrestler going off the grid for a little bit.
I'm rooting for him. He seems like a good kid. He's just didn't work out as a pitcher. It happens. There's not you can do. And so now, if he's willing to take to being a position player and commit to it, you never know.
Yeah, and no one wants. You were drafted 7th overall. It's got to be a really tough thing for him to then have it go the way it has. So.
I can't imagine reading everyone saying mean things about you online consistently, and just it's not a great situation.
Welcome to our world, right?
Yeah, right.
I guess I didn't think of that one through before I said it.
Gotta have thick skin. All right, Ian. We'll let you go. We appreciate you coming on, and we'll hopefully catch up with you in maybe a couple months down the road or something to see where these guys, what sort of developments have been happening and where these guys stand at that point.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me on, guys.
Awesome. Real quick, Ian. Actually, one question.
Here we go.
No, I've seen you guys. It's that time of the year. Sox Prospects is. You guys have been publishing a lot of stuff, a lot of rankings. So, just any sort of material people should look out for in the site.
I would say the big thing is that I'm going to be at spring training next week, and a few of us are. So we'll have a bunch of coverage down for minor league spring training on most of the guys we've talked about today. So just follow this, if you can follow the site's Twitter feed. It's just at Sox Prospects. And just check out the SoxProspects.com website, the news page, the forum. There'll be a lot of discussion around spring training, and there'll be a lot of content going up from that over the next couple of weeks. So just check that out if you're interested in learning more about the guys we discussed, because that's who we're going to be seeing down there.
Awesome.
So at Sox Prospects on Twitter and at Ian Kundle?
Yep.
All right, sounds good. That's the Director of Scouting for SoxProspects.com, Ian Kundle, coming in to give us a little insight into the Red Sox farm system before the 2019 season.
All right, thanks, Ian. Appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks, guys, for having me on.
Thank you so much.
Yep.
Good stuff as usual by Ian. I love having those guys on.
Yeah, it's good. Again, we mentioned it at the top. It's it's good to get the opinions of some of the guys that have seen these players on a regular basis, because for most of us, it's just you read the scouting reports, you read the results,
and you just
from the hip. Yeah, you just shoot from the hip and form your own opinion. But it's good to see from these guys who have seen them on a consistent basis. And again, if you want to, I find their Twitter feeds, the Sox Prospect Twitter feed, to be really great to follow. A lot of interesting rankings. Ian is great. Again, he's at Ian Kundle, Cundall on Twitter. And another one that I feel is a good Twitter follow is Chris Hatfield. His Twitter is at SP Chris Hatfield, and he has a lot of good stuff too. So, if prospect stuff and really nerdy baseball things are your thing, it's certainly ours. I think it's worth following those guys.
Is there anything that, just from that conversation, that sort of stood out to you?
That, to me, it's...
Because towards the end, it was, and I mentioned this in one of the final few questions there, was just how they've been able to replenish their talent through that 2017...
Excuse me.
Come on, bless you. The 2017 international signing period, the 2018 draft. I mean, it seems like that they have pretty high aspirations for several of the players that come from those two groups.
Well, yeah. To me, that was a big thing that stood out. And, everyone gets caught up with the guys at the top of the prospect rankings. But often, and we did this in the office last week, when you look back at, teams' top 10 rankings throughout the years, very rarely do those guys pan out. There's, there obviously are some here and there, but you look at a guy like Mookie Betts, who he was sort of a mid-level prospect, and then he obviously took off and became something different entirely. So, what I think is always interesting is kind of identifying these guys who might be just outside the top 10 or in the middle, who there's some buzz around, but people just don't know yet. And he obviously had some in Gilberto Jimenez and Jaron Duran, and just some sort of guys around that area, you know, because sometimes those are the guys that come out of nowhere, and next year they're a top 3 and they become superstars.
Yeah, and also, you know, what he pointed out with regards to like the middle of the pack and just the overall depth of it. I mean, you look at the top, and it's not the, you know, their top 3 to 5 prospects aren't the sexiest across Major League Baseball, and you don't have these guys that are regarded as future all-stars or impact players. But
yet,
you know, yet. But it's also, I think there's several guys you can point to and say he has the makeup of what could potentially be a useful Major League player.
Right. And I think also, you know, what he said about Tristan Casas was pretty interesting, and I've read a lot about him.
That's the thing too. So much unpredictability.
It's so much unpredictability, but you know, anytime you hear a Freddie Freeman comp, it has to make you feel good. And we're talking about a guy that's only had a few professional at-bats. But in general, I think the big takeaway is that the system is in a much better place. And I know, what was it, Keith Law or Baseball America had them dead last. I think, and I'm not going to pretend I know everything about every farm system, but that feels pretty low. And I know Keith Law had him higher, but in general, I feel like there's optimism surrounding it. And that's good for 2 reasons. 1, you want to have good players in your system. But 2, with the Red Sox and with a guy like Dave Dombrowski sort of running things who likes to trade, you need assets if you want to improve your team. And you know, last year you saw maybe you were handcuffed because you didn't have a good farm system, and now as you build assets, suddenly you can get in on trades, and you know, it's just good all around, obviously, to have.
Yeah, Tristan Casas, just the 2 professional games before the thumb surgery. Jay Groom, a pitcher coming off Tommy John. Those 2 guys ranked 2nd and 3rd respectively according to Sox prospects ranking. So I mean, you could look a year from now and the farm system could look drastically different because those guys, I mean, you know, maybe Casas emerges this year as like a legitimate top 100, top 50 prospect across Major League Baseball, in which case, you know, that just kind of changes the whole outlook of the organization.
Yeah, and another thing that's interesting for me too is, you know, I look at, and like if you want to still consider Rafael Devers a prospect, and obviously he's not, he's won a World Series, but in age, he certainly still feels like a prospect. And I look at him, Chavis, Casas, Delbeck, all 4 of those guys are third base / first base is kind of what they're listed as.
Yeah.
So you got some redundancy there, which is a good problem to have, but it's, and who are they going to identify here? Is the, you know, is some, who's going to get squeezed out? Or is maybe one of them, Chavis or Dalbec, going to go to second? And we're a ways away from having those questions answered, but it's something worth monitoring.
Yeah, and it's going to become even more important, obviously, as we get to the point where, you know, Xander Bogaerts becoming a free agent, Jackie Bradley Jr. becoming a free agent, Mookie Betts in a couple of years becoming a free agent. Like, there's going to be some questions as to how they're going to, you know, if any of those guys were to depart, which you can't pay all of them, how do you go about filling those holes? Obviously, free agency is one avenue, trades are an avenue, but, you know, are you able to groom some of these guys to take over those positions on a full-time basis?
Right, because, I mean, aside from guys like Chris Sale and David Price and Porcello, but, you know, really across the roster last year, you had a lot of homegrown talent.
Yeah.
And, you know, and that's obviously a great thing to have. And if you're going to transition into this next phase, if and when you lose some of these players, you got to have guys that can step up and replace them. So, you know, I think there's some promise there, but obviously we'll see what this conversation is like in September, because it seems like, you know, these things change a lot over the course of the summer, and guys emerge, guys slide. I mean, last year Brian Mata was like the #2 prospect in the system. Now he's 8th. He's walking guys, and it's conversations.
A lot of volatility.
A lot of, yeah, exactly. But either way, yeah, good conversation, good stuff as always.
All right. Well, let's slap a bow on this thing. I'm sure we'll catch up one more time before the regular season begins. Really just wanted to use this one to focus on the prospects, though, because it is sort of another intriguing layer to, you know, the beginning of the season as they try to repeat as world champions.
Yeah, and you know, as a couple seam heads, it's fun talking prospects.
Seam heads.
You don't get paid off.
Call me a seam head.
Okay.
Head. All right, we're out of here. That's Dakota Randall. I'm Ricky Doyle. Thanks again for joining the NESN Red Sox podcast. We'll catch up with you in a few weeks, because opening day, it is coming.
All right.
It's coming, folks.
Yeah, we'll talk to you then.
See you later.